Hello and welcome to another edition of ChinnyVision. This time we're taking a look at the MSX. In the early to mid 1980s there were lots of different computing standards, some of which succeeded and some of which failed. You may have had a Sinclair Spectrum, you may have had an Amstrad CPC, or a C64, Acorn Electron, Jupiter Ace, Auric, Elan Enterprise, BBC Micro, all those different standards. Now the lesson that the Japanese manufacturers had learnt stemmed from videotapes. There'd been lots of different videotapes systems, Video 2000 by Philips, Betamax by Sony, and VHS by JVC. And the Japanese manufacturers got together and said, this videotape thing's work for us. We're all now making VHS tapes. We're all producing our own machines, all differently spec'd, but all running to one standard. So initially, ASCII Corporation, you've probably heard of them from ASCII Text, and Microsoft got together and decided to create a standardized computing system. And that system, taking this Spectrum and the Amstrad away there for a second, was the MSX. And here's a Sony HitBit. The machine was created by, and I've got to be careful to pronounce this properly, and I'm probably going to get it wrong, Kazuhiko Nishi, who was Vice President of Microsoft Japan and Director of ASCII Corporation, and yes, I just have read that off Wikipedia. And the idea was to create a standard computer that all the different manufacturers could make. They could produce their own look and feel of the machines, different exteriors, but they'd all run to a standardised internal basic specification. And that specification was, it would be based on a Z80, it'd have 32K of ROM, Microsoft Basic built-in version 1 of that, and the RAM standard would be a basic version of 8K, but in actual fact most machines provided 64K, and there were some with 128K as well. Graphically, the machine's very similar to the Sinclair Spectrum. It's got 16 colours, it runs at 256 by 192. In actual fact, there's 15 colours available because one of those colours is transparent. So the Spectrum has its 15 colours with the bright, and of course, black is black in both bright and normal on the Speccy. And on the MSX, so you've got those 15. The sound will be very familiar to Spectrum and Amstrad owners. It's a General Instruments AY38910. So it sounds the same as a Spectrum or an Amstrad, or a Spectrum 128, or an Amstrad CPC. There was one big difference here from the Spectrum and the Amstrad, which is, I suppose, technically speaking, it could be quite closely related to, given it's got the same CPU, and that is that it has 32 sprites. So you've actually got sprite support here, like the Commodore 64 has, on a machine that's quite similar to the Spectrum. We'll be having a look at that when we see some of the games. There are limitations with that. You can only have so many, I think it's 4 per line of the display, so you've got to do some clever tricks if you want to cross things over on the display. Lots and lots of companies produced MSX, and Philips were one of them. Sony, that we've got Sony one here, Pioneer, Yamaha, JVC, Samsung, Daewoo, Goldstar, Panasonic, Spectra Video, Sanyo, Mitsubishi, Toshiba, Hitachi, and every Japanese manufacturer you can think of. They all went to bundle on the idea of the MSX. So we're going to have a look at this particular MSX I've got here. This is a Sony HitBit 75B that I only recently acquired about 9 months ago on eBay. I think it cost me about £40, and it was a curiosity buy really, because as an Amstrad owner back in the 80s and a Spectrum and a Commodore 64 owner, I've got a lot of the other machines here as well. And I'd seen MSX games mentioned in magazines and thought, and I saw it come up on eBay. I thought, yeah, I'll grab that and see what it's like. I know it's probably full of specky ports. And like Alphaville, it was big in Japan. So I thought, hey, let's see what the fuss is about. When you get a HitBit, the first thing that strikes you when you get it out of the box is how solid it is. This thing weighs a ton. I've talked about Acorn machines before being well built. This, the second you get it out of the box, it feels like a Sony. It's well built. It's black, like a lot of Sony kit of the era. Those sharp lines round the side. Lovely power button. That's a proper Sony power button. The font even reminds you in the green there of the PlayStation 2 buttons, slightly with the font on there, and just the sleek lines and just the general build quality of the thing. It's really nice. The keyboard as well. The first thing that strikes you about the keyboard is you've got these solid plastic keys at the top here for the F keys, function keys. So you've got F1, F2, F3, F4, F5, and then F6 to F10 if you hold down shift. They don't travel like the normal keys do. They're don't travel very much. You've also got this home, stop, insert, delete, and this recessed reset key here as well. It's quite unusual, which is quite nice to have a standardised reset key in there that is recessed, so you can't accidentally hit it like you can with the break key on the BBC Micro and just lose everything in one go. All the MSXs had cursor keys by design, and you saw these aped on machines like the Commodore Plus 4 and also the Amstrad CPC 664, which had the big MSX style blue cursor keys that then got dropped for the 6128. Looking at the keyboard itself, it's lovely. It really is. Sounds a little bit cheap when you press the keys, but the movement and the feel of the keyboard is absolutely spot on. I've got to say, this is probably my favourite 8-bit keyboard. Sony have gone to town. You've got a caps lock key that lights up. This isn't plugged in here, but you've got a little LED on there. Your escape tab, control shift keys, and the other keys around here are all highlighted in light grey, whilst the rest of the keys are in black. But it does feel so nice. Of course, it's a Japanese machine, and one thing they haven't done here is it's almost Mac-like in that you've got your at key up onto there, and then your quotation marks down on a key down there, which is a little bit irritating, but you kind of, these days, you're a little bit more used to it, especially if you haven't been bothered to set your Mac to British settings. The other thing I love about the machine, it says a lot about its Sony origins, and Amstrad and other companies obviously copied this for their machines. Is this little diagram on the front here, and it shows you the computer, the printer, the floppy drive that you can plug in, the data recorder, controller B, controller A, going through the audio and video to the TV. That's like little diagrams used to get on hi-fis of the period, and I think it's just really nice. You've got your main cartridge slot on the top here. The cartridges don't lock in, as is common with these kind of machines from this era. So there's a label warning in there, change cartridges only when power switch and lamp are turned off. I do want to mention this on-off switch again because it's so nice. Hopefully your microphone can pick that noise up, but it feels like an expensive hi-fi, an expensive Sony hi-fi on-off switch from the era. It just exudes quality. It's not often you can say that about an 8-bit computer on-off switch. So I guess it's now time to flip this thing around and have a look at the back. As I said before, it's so heavy. And the first thing I notice here is the mains cable goes straight into the unit. And I can prove that by just bringing the plug up there and waving that around. The previous owner's written Sony on the back of it, so they knew which machine it was. Presumably they had lots. And that's because the PSU, like the BBC Micro, is built into the unit. So that's sort of, on one hand, that makes it easy because you don't need to run around trying to find supplies for it. On the other hand, of course, if the PSU blows up inside there, you've got a big repair job on because you can't just go and buy another 5 volt or 12 volt or 9 volt PSU. And one thing I also notice here is this. It's a SCART connector. And this is a machine from 1984. I've often said that the Amstrad GX4000 was the only machine that I could think of that had a SCART on it for ease of use. And I know that when you've seen videos on ChinnyVision, they've been in composite from the MSX. That's because I've been having a little bit of trouble capturing from RGB on the MSX. I hope to fix that fairly soon, but at the moment I'm still stuck with composite. But yeah, you can plug any SCART connector into there, and if it's fully RGB enabled, bingo, off you go. You've got a full RGB picture. You've also got, bizarrely, because you've got everything here on the SCART, an audio-video DIN connector as well. So if you wanted to, I don't see the point of having both. I don't know why Again, perhaps it was the MSX specification that required you to have that. But yeah, you've got the option there. You've also got a cassette connector there, and that's a full input, output, microphone and earphone, and also a remote to remote control the tape recorder like the Amstrad can. Got this funny printer connector there. Some kind of proprietary, well, not proprietary, because again, this would have been standard to the MSX. It's not a type of connector I've ever seen before, but all MSXs would have had that. Your RF output is up there on that phono connector. And finally, and bizarrely, this particular machine has 2 cartridge slots in it. So you've got a second one at the back here. Now, I think the reason for that is if applications came on cartridge, you might be able to get another storage cartridge to plug in. So you may well need to have 2 cartridges plugged in at once for certain applications so that you could do different things. I don't think it's so you can just plug 2 games in at once and switch between them. We can't do that because the games need to load up, boot up. But on the startup screen, which we'll show later, it does allow you to select either cartridge slot if you've got both of them plugged in. But as I say, I think that's not a gaming thing. That is a productivity feature of the machine. So I'll flip the machine around. On the other side, you've got nothing. And on this side, you've got 2 joystick ports, standard Atari style ports there, 9-pin. You can plug your Amstrad and your Commodore 64 joysticks into that if you wish. So this machine, as I flip it around again, just put it back down. As I say, it's a Sony 75B HitBit, and it has 64K of RAM inside, so it's pretty much a standard MSX specification. And this particular model launched in October 1984 and hit the UK for £299. So you're looking at, if we're looking at October 84, £30 or so cheaper than the CPC 464, which came with a monitor, and that would have been colour for that price. There was a lot of fuss before the MSX launched. All the magazines were saying the Japanese are coming, they're going to do to the computer industry in the UK what they did to televisions and they destroyed the British television industry. And Sinclair and Amstrad and all these companies that had gone into the market were going to be absolutely destroyed. This never materialised, and the price really was part of that, I guess, as well as the other machines being better specified. Spec-wise, as I said, it's very well built, but it's a Spectrum in terms of most of the games. And your Spec-E 48K you would have got at the time, compared to this for £300, $299. It's a no-brainer when you saw these two in the shops, really, isn't it? Or you can have a CPC 464 for a few quid more, and eventually that was down to $299 after Alan Sugar brought the price down. After, I think it was Christmas '84, the price came down to the standard $299 for colour, $199 for the green screen, and he started bundling games as well. The HitBit was stubbornly $299, and many of the other MSX machines were similarly priced, so they didn't really stand a chance in the UK. That said, they were big hits in Japan, Brazil, certain parts of Europe, the Netherlands and Spain also. So the machine wasn't a flop, it was a big hit. It's just it wasn't a big hit in the UK market. Now, we looked at the Commodore Plus 4 the other week, and we saw that Commodore built in some applications into that machine. Sony also did this, which is something beyond the standard MSX specification, for the HitBit 75B. And in here, you have a scheduler, a memo pad, an address book, and a data transfer program. It's nothing particularly exciting, but it's all free software, I suppose. I don't know why you'd want the address book or a memo pad or a scheduler, but the data transfer would have been a useful thing to have. So what makes this thing tick? Well, let's open them up and find out. Oh dear. Flip her over, and I've got 2 screws in the bottom. Is that it? So well built. Just going to undo is that screw going to go in there? Right, now I've undone them all, and there we go. And that's the back of the keyboard there. It's nice solid construction, none of your Sinclair membrane rubbish. That's a proper keyboard made in Japan. And it's all embossed on the back there, ADDS. whoever, perhaps that's the manufacturer of the keyboard. Very nice and oh, that's funny stuff on the back of the main unit. That's some kind of heat shielding. Don't know. So we're very clean on the inside here. It's for a machine that's 30 years old. See no Mitsumi on the connector there for the cinch cartridge slot. We'll have a scan round, but we've got a huge heatsink down there. So just a bit of plastic and a... that's covering up the power supply circuitry. So that's the power supply there. Big old thing in the corner there. That on-off button there. Big old switch. A lot of space on there, but there is a heatsink under there as well. And there's these metal bars across the circuit board. I think they are to steady the keyboard. I would imagine so. Yeah, you can see the lines across there where it rests, where it's just been darker over the years on that bit of rubber. That helps steady the keyboard when you're typing. So there's absolutely no give. So lovely touch there from the engineers at Sony. None of this keyboards like the Amstrad and the Spectrums where I've got my Amstrad over there just next to me. And that's the Amstrad you can hear. Doesn't have anything like that underneath. This Sony is really well made. And I have to say, I'm not an MSX expert. I've only had this for 9 months, so I'm guessing. I'm making educated guesses and looking at some of these chips and knowing what they are. So we have a run round and just have a quick look at what some of these things do. And there's a little bit of dust there, but no one's been in here for 30 years. So that chip down there has got a quite big heatsink on it. Now, as you know, if you've got a Spectrum with a ULA in it, that gets very hot. And I'm wondering if that is one of the custom chips, because one thing about the MSX is they integrated a lot of things down into a custom chip in order to reduce the costs. So that could well be some kind of custom chip in there. There's a lot of stuff covered over by a big heatsink over here. Look at the date codes of some of the chips, that Yamaha there, and that was manufactured week 15, 1987. So although this machine came out in 84, this particular model was manufactured somewhere around the middle of 1987. I've been looking around trying to find out where the Z80 is in this, and I've actually come to the conclusion it's probably that sharp chip there. And the reason is the pins looks the right size for a Z80, and also it's got the code on there on the top, 80A, and of course it would be a Z80A chip. So I'm guessing that will be the Z80 processor, but please, if I'm wrong, put it in the comments below, because this isn't like an Amstrad or a Spectrum or a Commodore 64 I can poke around inside all day and go, yes, I know that does this and that does that. This is the first time I've seen inside an MSX, so it's entirely new for me, and I'm just looking at the chip names that kind of say something to me. And look at this down here. You've got some jumpers here, some wire links across the board. So 16K, 64K, which we've got the wire link across, and 16K there, and another 64K link there, which we've got the wire across for. And presumably that is for selecting which specification machine this is at the factory. So it's got 64K of RAM fitted, it would have the correct link across there. So I assume Sony must be making a 16K version of this machine as well, perhaps not for sale in the UK, because I don't think the HitBit came with anything other than 64K in the UK, but certainly there must have been a lower spec version around for them to put those links on there. I guess that also means these are the memory chips around here, and if they're 8K memory chips, which it looks like they are, you've got 816, 32K, 64K there, so almost certainly that is probably the RAM set up there. But hey, Chinny, that's enough wittering about the hardware. What about the games and these cartridge slots? Well, let's start with the kind of stuff that was available in the UK. The MSX was a minority machine, and if you thought the Amstrad was bad for specky ports, then you ain't seen nothing yet. As we reviewed Continental Circus the other week, the MSX version was so bad it was basically the Spectrum version running at about a third of the speed. Gemini Wing on the MSX, well, the conversion's so terrible it still has the Sinclair joystick options on the menu screen. I'm not joking. They converted it so quickly, they left the joystick options in. But it's not all bad. You've got many of your favourite games on the MSX, for example, 180 by Mastertronic on the MAD label. That is a very good conversion. It's essentially the same as the Spectrum 128K version. Same music, plays very well, looks the part, and it's a really good game. Codemasters dipped their toes into the waters with some MSX versions of their most popular games, one of which was Vampire, one of their earliest releases. I expect many of these games actually were never produced with the UK market in mind. They were actually aimed at the Spanish and the Dutch market. Very interestingly, there's also a version of Feud for the MSX. It's a curious game, and one we didn't review when we did our Feud roundup just over a year ago. It's essentially the Spectrum version, a little bit more colourful, but with the Amstrad sound. So in effect, it's what a Spectrum 128K version would have been like if Mastertronic had done one, or Binary Design rather. So in the case of Feud, it's a really interesting port, and one that I didn't even know existed when I did the Feud roundup of all the different versions. Very much a game worth looking at. We've of course looked at Chiller in the past. That's interesting because it uses the hardware sprites, and we know that the Spectrum version is pretty duff, the Amstrad version is not very good, and the game is by the same coder as the Amstrad version, but it stands up pretty well. Chiller's never a great game, but it's a pretty good conversion, it actually uses the MSX's hardware. So if you'd said the name MSX to anybody in the late 80s, early 90s, they would have said one game back at you, and that was the game we know today as Gradius, but in those days known as Nemesis, and this is a cartridge version of Nemesis, a 1 megabit ROM. Quite hard to get hold of. You need to import it from Japan. I managed to find this version in the UK, and this changes everything in these cartridge games. And this lovely packaging. That is plastic that certainly isn't going to biodegrade in a landfill. Tony Robertson's going to be digging that up in 1,000 years' time, or the equivalent of Tony Robertson saying, hey, what is this stuff? Because I don't know what, it's some kind of very tactile plastic, very nice. And you've got your MSX cartridge game there. That goes into your cartridge slot, like so. And then what you have is a 1 megabit game plugged directly into your 64K MSX. Suddenly it's not specky ports, it's very, very polished games indeed, using the hardware sprites, using the hardware to its full ability, no memory limitations, or the only limitation being the amount of memory on the cartridge. And you actually get to see what this MSX is capable of. And I will review Nemesis separately at some point in the future, but just look how glorious this version is. Until the PC Engine version came out, this was the definitive home version. The home ports in the UK were absolutely abysmal. Terrible, terrible games. The Amstrad version particularly disappointing. But here on the MSX, you've got the arcade experience as best you could hope for in 1986. It moves well, yes, okay, the scrolling is 8x8 pixels at a time, but you soon get past that. The hardware sprites are really smooth. The end-of-level baddies are massive. No, if you'd seen this in 1986, you would have thought it was some kind of witchcraft, let alone even a few years later. It's really good and really shows what the MSX can do. And this isn't just Nemesis on cartridge. This is many, many of the cartridge games that you can find from Japan. None of the limitations of the UK tape games have been badly ported from other systems, and of course often written for the lowest common denominator system, although that said the Feud 64K only. But Vampire and some of these other games here I've got in front of me don't say, which means they could actually run on 32K machines, I guess. I'm not sure. Another interesting thing is, while we're talking about these games, is the colour differences on the MSX games. I'm just going to put those in there. Look, Codemasters are on green, Mastertronic are on white, and I've seen some games on black for the colour coding. So the publishers couldn't even get that right for the MSX. So, is the MSX a system worth owning? Well, if you've got your Amstrad Spectrum and your Commodore 64, then certainly it's worth a look. I've got to say that if you think you're going to be able to get away with just buying tape games and getting the full MSX experience, think again. You will end up paying through the nose probably for a copy of Nemesis. I was patient and found one in the UK for under £20. But if you want to import one from Japan, about £40 is about what you're going to pay for the system. That said, it's a brilliant game. And the other cartridge games as well, Ping Pong, Hypersports, and all these other cartridge games, they're all brilliant. And they, as good as some of these games are, Feud's a brilliant game, but it doesn't use the full MSX hardware, even though it's a good game. And that's the problem with 95% of the tape games. They don't touch what the hardware can do. So if you're going to buy an MSX, you're going to end up buying cartridge games, or a multi-cart if you want to go down that route. What to pay for an MSX? I'd say about £40 for a HitBit to get a machine like this, but well worth it. You're getting you can just feel the quality. It's such a nice machine. There are other machines available. I see a lot of Toshibas on eBay. They look as ugly as sin. Certainly, if you're going to buy an MSX, go for a HitBit. For my money, they're the best machines. They're the best built. They're just lovely. And certainly budget for some cartridge games as well. Certainly Nemesis. You've got to own Nemesis. If you own an MSX and don't own Nemesis, then, well, you've got to. And it's an absolutely brilliant game. Overall, it's not the best gaming system in the world, but it's a really, really interesting one to own and a really fantastically built machine.